To this webinar, Building Communities That Learn, Lessons from the AI Frontier with Gene Kim. I'm super excited to dig into some cool topics with Gene, get a sense of his history, background, where he's been with Lean, and what he's learning from the bleeding edge of AI. And we'll take your questions as we go along. So go ahead and drop questions as we move along, and we'll try and address as many of those as we can as we get to the wrap-up stage. So we'll do some quick intros and history and what we're looking at, and then we'll jump right in.
Sounds great. And Tyson, I'm so delighted to be here, and it's so good seeing you again after meeting you in person some number of months ago. So delighted to be here.
Awesome. Move to the next slide. So just a bit of history on who we are, Lean Enterprise Institute. I like to think of us as the OGs of Lean, but maybe that's given a bit too much credit. But we've been studying and bridging theory and practice, rooted in the Toyota production system and Toyota Way. We really focused on developing leaders and capability who build problem-solving organizations. So that's great. Now, as we move forward, can we advance that slide, Allison? So I just want to plug for the summit. I met you, Gene, at your summit in Vegas, and was completely impressed with what you'd built. And LEI has kind of been working on this tech component because we see it as such a potentially huge enabling factor, and often even an encumbering factor in the way that people do work. And so at your summit, we had, I think, Johnny Leroy from Granger and a few other folks. We've enlisted some of those folks to speak at our summit, you as well, and Steve Spear. And we're excited to be able to, I think the future of Lean has to have technology deeply integrated with it in order to build capability. But excited to have you. And any thoughts before we jump in about what you're going to be speaking about, or give us a preview of what you want to dig into there?
Oh, yeah. In fact, yeah, I'm so delighted and honored to be a part of the LEI Summit coming up in a couple of weeks. And actually, I'm even more delighted that I'll be able to meet so many of my heroes, including Art Smalley, my co-author, Dr. Stephen Spear, and so many others, including Dr. Leiker and so forth. Yeah, and I guess what I'll be talking about is I think many people view, and especially in the Lean community, as technology that are the people that you try to stay away from. There are always people in the way. They're always people that are the biggest obstacles to achieving all your goals, dreams, and aspirations. And yet there is a community among technologists that have widely and deeply embraced the Lean principles and are using it to solve their biggest problems. And I think with AI, there is AI is reshaping technology organizations. I think it's going to shape every organization, business organization. And there's an opportunity for anyone trying to solve a problem to pair up with technologists and solve them in a way that is going to be faster and more fulfilling than ever before. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun in my career, but I've never had as much fun as like right now. So awesome. Yeah, it's just an amazing time to be alive.
If you want to pull that slide down, Allison, maybe two comments on that. Gene, one is when I went to your summit and I discovered it, I was like, oh, if I'd like been more connected with this community like 5 years ago or 3 years ago, I would have had a place to like pull these technology leaders who were struggling with these kind of monolithic systems that just have this tendency to make everything hard and calcified. And so just seeing technology leaders who'd kind of decompose these monolithic systems and enabled a different level of service to the business, like to the people who add value to the work in the organization, was incredible. And then two, on the AI front, we Lean practitioners have often kept technology in the very last cycle of standardization.
Yeah.
Because it's often been inflexible. I'd have to go find an engineer to help me modify a program. I'd go into a backlog. Yeah. I'd have to negotiate with 5 other people whether my thing got prioritized to the next sprint. And it was just
maybe not this year, maybe next year, right?
Yeah. And just seeing, and your summit was inspiration for me, just seeing what has been enabled in the democratization of software and technology in the hands of, people like me or others. It pulls technology and software into the early stages of Kaizen, because
Yeah.
it's no longer welding, it's duct tape and cardboard that can be spun up and discarded just like cardboard. And you can extract those lessons and enable your workflow. So just, that was maybe I wanted to echo what you were saying and really encourage people to tune into what's happening in technology and with technology leaders.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What a fantastic setup. In fact, I'm wondering if I can maybe just share a little bit of my background and maybe
Yeah, for
share
people.
that and
Yeah.
share how I actually might have more in common with the lean community than one might think. And so I've been studying high performing technology organizations for 27 years, and so that was a journey that started back when I was a CTO and founder of a software company called Tripwire in the information security and compliance space. And so, back in 1999, our goal was to really study these high performing technology organizations that simultaneously had the best project due date performance and development, the best operational reliability and stability, as well as the best posture of security and compliance. And so, as one can imagine, right, the reason we study these organizations is to see how they made their good to great transformation, so that we could understand how other organizations could replicate those amazing outcomes. And so, as you can imagine, a 27-year journey, there were many surprises, but one of the biggest surprises was how it took me into the middle of the DevOps movement, which really was, attacking the technology value stream, where you had very powerful entrenched silos called development and QA and operations and information security and the business units. And back in the mid 2000s, the typical cadence of a technology project is you would deploy these capabilities to production so that users could actually use it maybe once a year. And so we are now in 2009. The emergent practice was that we can deploy 10 times a day. And so this was at Flickr, the photo sharing site. And when people heard this in the technology community, people were thought this was reckless and irresponsible, maybe even immoral, because if deployments of technology is painful and it's once a year, why how could you possibly comprehend doing it 10 times a day? And so, as any lean practitioner would know, is that if you can shrink the batch sizes, you actually reduce risk, you can get far better, faster feedback loops and so forth. um, and so what I don't share often is that the book that really sent me down this course was reading in 1999 a book called The Goal by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt from a slightly adjacent school of practitioners. But I remember reading that book. That it was one of the most influential books in my career. And how did I end up reading that book? Is because I read The Machine That Changed the World by that by Dr. Daniel Roos, and I think Dr. Womack was a part of that effort as well. And so I remember reading that in 1987. Right, I still have that copy of the book over here, and so really kind of our goal after reading the goal, our it became kind of a mission of my co-authors, like how can we rewrite that goal, that book, but for the IT value stream, to show that the same principles that you use to create great flow and great customer outcomes and great business outcomes on the manufacturing plant floor, if you can apply in an orthogonal way to the technology value stream, you should be able to replicate the exact same results and explain why 10 deploys a day isn't crazy, but it's actually necessary if you want to get great outcomes. And so that book came out in 2013. That was a book called The Phoenix Project. And I got to work on some cross population studies that spanned 36,000 respondents, very much inspired by The Machine That Changed the World, that spanned over 6 years. And what we found is that, great organizations do deploy 10 times, more than once a day. And, the famous stat that kind of shocked everybody was that Amazon was deploying 136,000 times a day, as a part of their daily work. And that's really is a way that you can make sure that you can scale developer productivity as you grow the technology organization. So, and then all that's now being upended again as AI is potentially automating the development work. And so it's just changing how we solve problems with technology. And as we had hinted at before, it's no longer, development organization holding you hostage, making you go through approvals and high coordination costs and getting onto backlogs and maybe pushing out your project out another year. It could really be done potentially not in quarters, but potentially in hours, right? And it's just as Kent Beck, a famous person in the technology space, he said in 2001, it's always about in any domain is the person with the problem and the person who can fix it. How closely can you get them together without mass amounts of communication and coordination and cajoling and escalating and prioritizing and synchronizing. So yeah, so these are all topics near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, it's when people ask me about Gene Kim and DevOps, I'm like, it's the guys who made these principles accessible to the technology community, and it's just a wealth of knowledge there, and it's fascinating. I mean, 20 years ago when I first dove in, you go read those books, you go read Deming, you go read Gold Rat, and you dig into maybe I don't know if you call it the first principles text, but the core texts that then allow you to iterate on top of it. And I think making that accessible to technology organizations and the stability that it's provided kind of set up this space for real capability building.
Yeah, and by the way, I was once sitting at a conference. Oh my goodness, this was in 2003, right? It was at I won't say which conference, but it was there was a theory of constraints person sitting next to a lean practitioner, and they were arguing about how the other school was wrong, and it was just, it seemed to be a bit absurd, kind of focusing on kind of strange minutia.
Yeah.
But I think what I think we could agree upon was that the goal has been integrated into almost every MBA curriculum, right? And it has introduced, I mean, the book sold 5-6 million copies, right? And it made, as you said, accessible, to people who have no experience in manufacturing, but it could make them appreciate, just how it appears like a simple system is actually wildly complex, and it takes disciplined problem solving, right, to get where you are to where you want to go. Mm-hmm. So, and that was very much our goal with the Phoenix project, was take a novel, but not about manufacturing plant floor operations, but to the management of the IT value stream.
Yeah, and that's been really very successful. This maybe before we hop into the vibe coding, which is really exciting, this bridging between communities where you had a theory of constraints guy sitting next to a lean guy. There's got to be a joke with a bar in there,
Yeah.
And they all arrive at St. Peter's Gate or something. But at your summit, I heard this dialogue about pushing back on cargo culting, and this concept of kind of bridging communities. How, kind of as a community organizer and as a leader, have you? I really didn't feel it or see it a lot in your event, which was really refreshing. But has that an intentional choice? How have you resisted that with your community?
Resisted what exactly? I just want to make sure I'm responding.
The cargo culting,
yeah,
and the dividing into tribes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I guess. By the way, and what was really rewarding, another thing that was a phenomenal part of my journey, was reading in 2001 the Dr. Stephen Spears Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System. And I remember reading that and just being dazzled again with my co-authors, right? About thousands of people in the Toyota manufacturing plant learning every day. I mean, a community of scientists, experimenting and learning every day. And we got to write a book together that came out a couple of years ago called Wiring the Winning Organization. And the goal was really to say, oh my gosh, it doesn't actually matter whether it's theory constraints, Deming, lean, the Toyota Production System, or for that matter, the technology, DevOps, and so forth, or fighter pilots, OODA loops. There's actually a common set of principles that drive all three. And so it was with great satisfaction that we worked together. You would think that Dr. Stephen Spear and I would have nothing to talk about because our backgrounds are so different, right? I mean, to vastly oversimplify it, right? He came from hardware, I came from software. But one of the big surprises, after interacting with him for over a decade, was that the papers and books we've read had a huge amount of similarity, right? Mm. So that we actually had this high bandwidth language that we could speak to each other, right? Because we could draw upon so many common principles, so much which was pioneered, in the space by the lean community. And so, I think one of the things that we were both frustrated by, because it happened, we've seen this happen in so many communities, is cargo culting, right? Is that people focus not on the principles, but the tools, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's, the 4 S's, whether it's, the andon chord, right? When they're missing the principles behind that. And I think that was really behind so much of Mike Rother's, works in the last decade. And I think as a person, who is running a conference like yours, and trying to create a community of leaders, it really, for me, the most important part was having testimonials and sharing experience reports, right? I think, having been, I feel like I owe my entire career to conferences. I've learned almost everything I've needed to learn at conferences. And, you know, the talks I just always found very frustrating are from kind of these supposed experts who are telling people what they should do, what they think you should do, right? And um, without an explicit theory. And what I have always loved are people sharing experience reports where they share, here's our organization, here's how we compete, here's where I fit in the organization, here's the business problem we set out to solve, here's what we did, here's what happened, here's what we learned, here's a problem that still remain, and here's help we look at where you're looking for. And I think and for me, the most important part are the testimonials where there's someone saying you created value for me, right? And in general, right, the more senior that person who's saying that you created value for them, right, the more business impact that you created. And so just really, I think a way to sort of combat cargo culting, which is you kind of go through the motions and behaviors, right? But you haven't actually created value. We can filter, through the, just by looking at the testimonials that they can bring to bear. And if they can't bring any, then one should, cast a dubious eye on whether they created value for anyone at all.
Cast a dubious eye.
Yeah.
So maybe we shift gears a little. When I was at your conference, the copy of Vibe Coding was about to come out. And as soon as it came out, I purchased it and read it and attempted to wrap my head around, where things were headed. And even since then, it just feels like there's these monumental shifts that are happening very quickly. And I know you've just kind of kept pursuing this thread. How much of it's hype? Where are you seeing these positive impacts, and for who? And what's happening?
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we should start with what is vibe coding.
Yes.
And so vibe coding was framed by Dr. Andre Karpathy, who is one of the legends in the AI field. So he was one of the creators of ChatGPT. He was in charge of machine learning at Tesla. He was one of the, he created so many seminal contributions to the AI field at industrial scale. And he said, I think it was in February, it's like, it's a new type of coding where, you just sort of, you're not really typing code in by hand. You're just letting the AI write the code for you. And, and it just sort of captured kind of what so many people have noticed, myself included, for the last, 2.5 years, which is that, for me, I got my graduate degree in computer science back in 1995. And, even though I wrote my last line of production code until, until last year, back in 2001, the act of coding, I had very kind of, I'm going to play actor for you. It's like you sitting in a quiet room, right, hunched over a keyboard, concentrating fully, right, and you're having to actually type in every line of code by hand. And instead, now you almost evoke it into being through conversation with an AI. And so I wrote this book with Steve Yegi. He is famous for his 20 years at Amazon and Google. He's just one of the best technologists I've ever met. And when we met like a year and a half ago, he was part of the great Amazon re-architecture in the early 2000s, when they went from exactly what you said, a monolith that you could only change once a year, right? They went from doing multiple deployments per day to deploying only once, a couple of times a year, because every deployment was so risky and the outcomes were so catastrophic that most deployments didn't finish, right? So they wanted to change something in the e-commerce site, and that's rapidly growing in the early 2000s, and they simply couldn't, right? And so they modularized the software. So it went from one module to 10 to hundreds to now thousands of modules, and now allow them to do 136,000 deployments per day. So, we had that shared history. There was, we had a lot of shared beliefs in common, but we also shared this passion around using AI for coding. And so both of us, we both thought our best days of coding were behind us. And so this guy's written 1 million lines of code in his career, which is like, one of the very, very top tiers. And he had stopped coding because it was just too difficult. The juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And so we ended up, he had made this offer to pair program together. So we were going to write a program together. I was going to set out to write something that I wanted to write for better part of a decade. And I did, if I can just share what the problem was, I listen to a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos, and the LAI podcast included with Dr. Womack. And whenever I hear something interesting, I take a screenshot, just in the hopes that someday I'll go back and maybe read more, look up a citation, maybe write about it. It turns out over the last 10 years, I've generated over 6,000 screenshots. And how many times I've actually gone back to them? Basically, a handful, right? And so I was like, okay, the problem I want to solve is I have this pile of screenshots. Can I use AI to sort of capture the timestamp, grab a transcript, and then excerpt maybe some video excerpts and post it to social media about like what I found so interesting? And I built it in 47 minutes. And so it was just, you can't have something like that happen to you and not have that change your life. And so next thing you know, we're working on a book together on vibe coding. And, it's I think treacherous. It's a lot of things can go wrong, but, the technology is getting better. And it's really about how do you teach developers that, this is actually going to change the way that we do work and bring in AI into every way that they solve problems every day. And so, by the book Forward was written by Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, CEO and co-founder of Anthropic, and he said, "Vibe coding is, at the one hand, a brilliant term because it evokes this very different way of coding, where you can just do it on the couch while watching TV, right? On the hand, it sounds jokey and unserious, but he said, Anthropic, there is no other game in town, and so it shows that." The world is changing out from underneath us, and it is so full of opportunity and so full of yet uncertainty because it changes potentially everything. Sorry for rambling on, Tyson.
No, that was really good. Maybe when I read the book, there's a metaphor in there about a kitchen and how in these kind of industrial kitchens and the invention of kind of the brigade system, you give each kitchen worker kind of a discrete role. So instead of someone trying to cook everything in that kitchen, they're stuck to desserts or they're stuck to a particular portion of the process. And this is like that framework works for people in any type of manufacturing, production or other. We know that when we kind of narrow context and role, we get improved outputs and more predictable outputs.
Yeah.
And so this framework, and that example was like, right, it resonated with me. It made sense. It was like, okay, if that's the case, then, where's the inventory? Where are the buffers? What enables volatility in it? I could take all these lean lessons and start to apply them there and test with it. And I think the analogy is great. So even if you're not a technologist, I think you could go read vibe coding and get a sense of maybe even where knowledge work is headed. And I think decomposing knowledge work to discrete tasks can enable a different level of kind of human capability and action. But a piece that I wanted to kind of poke at, I think Steve did like a 30-pager on Gastown and kind of what he's experimenting with these multiple agents. And then I think Kent Beck did one recently on spinning up kind of like multiple agents and seeing which one does better. And it kind of shifted my thoughts related to, wait a minute, is this industrialized production or is it like genetics and selective, like planting bacteria in all the cultures and seeing which one thrives in which environment and then selecting it. But the field's moving so quickly. I kind of wanted to get your take on my rough attempts to analogize. I guess that's the way you say it.
I love the way you phrase that. So maybe if we can make this concrete. So what does vibe coding look like? I had mentioned to you, I've been running this conference for 11, going to his 12th year. And one thing that I want to do is I want to review everyone's presentations. And so I can give, concrete feedback. And this, especially for some things I really care about. And I just got very frustrated. It was like, as for PDF files, it would open up an Apple preview and I have to reshape the windows and sort of like go into light sort of view and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, I opened up a window and went into a coding agent, Claude Code. And I said, basically I complained. I am so tired. I'm trying to review PDF files for a conference I run. And Apple preview is making me go mad because I have to adjust the window. Here's what I want you to do. Write me an app that that would take the PDF file and render it full size, full screen, 3 across and 2 down, and then make the left and right arrow keys, go to the next page. And I had something running in 5 minutes. And so, like, this is the world we're entering into. And so, what you quickly find when you do that, so basically you are conjuring up software just by describing the software that you want to build. And so this is so alien and like magic to people who've been doing software like myself since the 90s, actually in the 80s. And so it is like really magic. And I think people who in their late in their career, like myself, right, these people you mentioned are just loving it, right, because suddenly all their aspirations and are now within reach. Junior people are picking up right away. But I think people who are like 10 to 15 years in their career, I think they are the people pushing back the most, saying that this is creating slop, right? It's going to ruin software. And so it was kind of on the one hand surprising, but kind of if you look at the sort of like people, which part of your career do you have the most identity wrapped up in? My value comes from writing code by hand, right? It's maybe not so surprising. And so what you quickly find when you do this is that often you're waiting for for the coding agent to create your software. And so what you do is you create a second agent, right? And now you're working on multiple problems at a time. And quickly you are finding like you are now have multiple work centers with routings and dependencies, right? And what dictates success or failure is how well you can coordinate actions. And so we're all familiar with manufacturing plant floor routings and how to create flow. And we study this in the Wiring the Winning Organization. But what it was for the Vibe coding book, we chose, I think, another kind of amazing example of an organizational wiring that created a breakthrough, which is George Escoffier, right, who created the kitchen brigade system in the, I think, in the 1840s, where pre and post him, I'm sure, I'm sure it's like the nature of scientific revolutions, right? It wasn't just him, but he is famous for popularizing the notion of division of labor, specialization of roles in kitchens. Because before that, essentially kind of restaurant dining, you always had to eat what was being prepared.
It's like
right?
one meal.
One meal, right? Because the complexity of kitchen organizations were not sophisticated enough to handle meals on demand. So you basically, ate what they prepared, or you were very rich and you had a private chef, and then they could make any customized meal but for one person. And so when he left the French army, he decided to apply those same lessons to see if they could create division of labor, and you ended up with an organization that was able to create handle far higher variety and predictable due date performance, so that you could order a meal and get it in a reasonable amount of time. And so we love that analogy because as a developer, you go from a line cook to a head chef, right? Where you are potentially managing not just one coding agent, but potentially 10, 100 coding agents. And your success will be how well can you organize the system so that you don't have overlapping work, so that you want to parallelize work where appropriate, sequentialize work where appropriate, and you have to be super attuned to feedback to make sure that you're not creating a mess, right? Or disasters when it comes to production code. So again, sorry for the long answer. I just wanted to sort of concretize and explain some of these kind of great observations that you had.
Yeah, as you spoke there, it reminded me of like in the auto factory, you can kind of optimize line speed, and the the back end runs a little faster than the front end because you'll end up with some loss, and you play with the buffers between it to highlight problems. But if you don't have an engineer or someone looking for that whole value stream to enable it, you can get in a lot of trouble really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's what made me think of this. There's a thing.
And if I can just maybe mention 30 seconds. And so you mentioned something surprising, which is like, if you have if you have love technology, if you have experience in, like, say, writing formulas in a spreadsheet, vibe coding is within reach for you, right? If you know how to articulate problems clearly, specify them well, right? Kind of are good at decomposing tasks. You are within an hour away from creating the software that you've always wanted to solve problems, that maybe that have been bothering you for months, or in my case, nearly a decade. I watched a product designer who's never used coded before, never used a coding agent. We did a workshop in Australia, and she's a designer, right? And basically, she solved a problem that she's been trying to solve, like in an industrial context, for a quarter, which was, given a production application, like I want to. In what way does it differ from the Figma design, right? And so she, as a designer, can sort of highlight that, to fix. She built it in 35 minutes, right? And half of that time was just trying to get the tool to work. I mean, it's just it is almost miraculous, what is people are doing these days.
Mm-hmm. I was on site with a client a few weeks ago, and this how would you say, this amplification effect of AI, and this concept that I've heard is like AI has this tendency to amplify whatever you have. So if you have like poor practice and architecture and inappropriate data labeling, it, throwing AI at it doesn't actually fix it. It amplifies it. In this case, we had a customer request backlog, and in that customer request backlog, there were things that were anywhere from like bugs with the software to just the customer not really knowing how to use the technology or software, or like a whole host of issues were lumped into this large backlog. And the concept was like, oh, let's just turn it over to AI, and it could tell us which problems we should be solving and create things for us. Is there any flaws in that thinking? And as you get into these hairy problems, what are kind of the limitations of AI, and what really has to be done either with humans or by humans, and what you can hand off there?
Yeah. Oh man, what a great question. I think anyone using AI for industrial work has to know that AI is lie, cheat, and steal. Right? I mean, they they're trained to be helpful, and they're trained to complete work. And so when you ask it to do something, often it will say something is done, even though it isn't actually fully done, right? And so in coding, there's a kind of a famous example, like you ask it to fix a bunch of tests that are failing, and it will finish 8 and delete 2, right? And so technically it fixed the test, but it doesn't actually kind of follow the spirit of the request. And again, the reason is that you can imagine why these foundational models are trained, is that they're trained to finish work. They're trained to make you happy, right? And to get the reward signal. And so there's something called the context window, right? In general, like the longer the conversation, the dumber it gets, right? In fact, the big surprising fact is that more than say 3,000 words, the performance of AI is to actually recall facts in the it's what you gave it, drops off dramatically. And so even though you can put a lot into an AI context window before it says, message too large, just know that the more you put in, the dumber it gets. And this has been shown in paper after paper. And so kind of what is the role of someone using AI? You are responsible for its outcomes. I think one of the things that we tried to show in the vibe coding book is that you have to understand kind of the way the technology works, just to be aware of where the vulnerabilities are, right? And so all that being said, right, it is on the one hand like a world-class expert on so many domains because it read everything on the internet. And it's also like a summer intern that has almost no judgment whatsoever, right? And so, those things can be simultaneously true, and also incredibly useful, right? I think any developer not using it as part of the daily work is it's almost painful to watch, right? And Steve Yegi, he said something just I thought was wonderful. Isn't that what engineering is all about? You are making reliable systems out of unreliable parts, and that's certainly in the software world. That is the entire name of the game. And so any engineer who scoffs at, look how bad it is at solving this problem, well, it's still a useful tool. And so to answer your question very concretely, can you give it the list of the entire backlog and say which ones are more important? I think if you kind of prime it in the right way, saying, hey, here's our mission, here's what the software is trying to do, here's our customer, and potentially if you let use tool calling to actually kind of not give it all at once, but potentially sort through, let it rummage through the database, 100%. I think it could do a phenomenal job, maybe even better than a human.
Yeah. what level of like data labeling should I consider beforehand, or is it like throw AI at it, see what it comes back with, and how it's labeled it appropriately, and do recursive learning?
I would I would do the second, right? It's like, hey, here's a pile of, here's years worth of backlogs and feature requests and so forth. Help me find, here's what our near-term goals are, right? Use that as a filter. Find me everything that is relevant,
Mm.
and which ones can be combined. In fact, combine them for me, right? Write a candidate one. If I just did that recently, look through open ones and see which ones were probably already implemented. I mean, how amazing is that? Right? I
Mhm.
think that's very much in the capability of for many software systems it is absolutely capable of.
That's stunning. I'm
Yeah.
like, like these things, these discoveries force me to do these recalculations of assumptions. And I
Yeah.
feel like my brain's behind in terms of the technology shifted in its capability in some really interesting ways. And um, I mean, I guess that leads me to this question of, if I'm a professional and maybe I'm not a coder, and maybe my use cases um, for coding is maybe lower than someone else. What what's your like? What should I be paying attention to, and how do I learn? How do I make sure? They say that the what is it? The early bird gets the worm, but the
Yeah.
second mouse gets the cheese. Like, is is AI the second mouse? Is it the early bird? What's the speed? And if I'm a knowledge worker or somewhere in the mix of management or knowledge work, what should I be paying attention to and learning?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think many people have kind of observed that coding is going to be the first. So a friend of mine, Dr. Daniel Rock, he's at the Wharton School. He was part of the Open AI jobs report that came out in 2023. And so they basically looked at all of the Bureau of Labor statistics, all the jobs and um, the roles and what the job entails. And they came out with this very kind of provocative finding, right? Is that which job is the most exposed to AI? The ones at the top were astronomers, tax preparation, um, uh, software developers, the database administrators, analysts, right? At the very bottom were house roofers, food preparation, and floor sanders, right? I mean, so what is astonishing is like every frontier AI lab is trying to solve the coding problem, and
Mm.
it's just astonishing how good AI is at coding. How this the rate of acceleration of how much better it is, faster it is at getting better, without a doubt. And I had mentioned I've done a lot of cross population studies over the last 25 years, um, and there's all these things that I SPSS I've used for 30 years. I've kind of memorized. It's almost muscle memory for me now. I will never use it again. Yeah, I think kind of one thing that I did recently was just put a bunch of Excel spreadsheets into a folder and went into Cloud Code and said, hey, uh, I'm looking for a bunch more surveys. Find and analyze the each one of the questions and come up with some insights that came out of it. It did clustering. It did all the things that an advanced graduate student could do. I used it to do survey design to help analyze 100 leaders at Cisco Security who were required to vibe code something into production. Use it for the survey design, the questions, and we're using it for the survey analysis. I mean, the idea of opening up SPSS and clean the data manually, doing the analysis manually, just unthinkable. Recently, I used it to analyze a set of quarterly statements, right, and be able to pull out cash flow balances, make some assumptions, make some projections on where cash goes. I mean, it's just so those are things I think are in the domain of anyone to use. Um, and so I was part of a research effort to look at AI impacts on coding. And for me, one of the top findings was this. Imagine on the y-axis, you have how much do you trust AI? And kind of the model we used was, to what degree can I uh, trust the other party? Because the more you trust something, the more willing you are to give it bigger tasks. You need fewer words to communicate the task. You need less supervision and so forth. And on the x-axis is how long have you been using AI? And what we found was that there was this line, right? The longer you use AI, right, the more you trust it. And it starts flattening off at 12 months and plateaus at 15 months. And so what it really shows, and by the way, the trust notion comes from the MIT beer game, right? It's like when feedback loops are slow, and you can't link cause and effect, people make very bad decisions. And like one of the comments that was made is that team members, when interviewed, were convinced that their teammates didn't understand the rules of the game. They didn't trust them, right? Because they behave so unpredictably. And so the same thing with AI is that the longer you use it, the more you can understand what it's good at, what it's not good at, and how to truly exploit the power that it gives you. And so if you believe that it takes 10,000 hours to get good at anything, including learning to play a musical instrument, playing a professional sport, or et cetera, right? I think AI is the same way. And so I think the advice is try to use it as much in your daily work as possible, because like, why lift heavy things when a machine can do it for you, right?
Practically speaking, is that like, are you like, download Claude, Gemini? Are there specific things that you think it'd be a better place for people to start? Or
Yeah, I think personally speaking, I use Claude Code, which is just a phenomenal tool for coding. In fact, they just released something called Claude Cowork, which is basically not just coding, but for any knowledge work, right? So it's really good at spreadsheets. It's really good at documents. I think that's going to be. There are many people saying that that's going to be so much more impactful. I mean, coding agents is like really impactful, but the thing about the audience for knowledge work is orders of magnitude larger than that. And then I would think anytime, just use ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, these things. Use it to research problems. Like I'm unhappy with an external vendor, and analyze this contract and tell me like what the outs are, and like what are the conditions that need to be met for us to exit out of this long-term onerous engagement, right? And it's not a lawyer, but it can definitely give you some helpful tips that you could only previously get from a lawyer.
Yeah. The thing that comes to mind is when someone comes to us and is like, we want to work on a lean transformation, we got to try and back them up to like, what is your problem to solve? And starting with a problem to solve. And then the second piece of advice we do is like, get a good coach. And I wonder with like, does that apply? Should I just go play around with it? One thing that evokes in my head is a challenge with technology and technology capability in my head is so much of it's personal, that observation of like others and what things they can do to enhance their skills or do correction becomes limited. And so, and with AI in particular, I do have this sense where it's like skills of problem decomposition and being able to use language to narrow context and understanding probability, like those become important in that space. But how to get the feedback loops and the knowledge and awareness that like, oh, I'm dealing with too large a context that I gave this. I'm using different language that's not appropriate for where it's pulling results. Just as I spoke, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about like, would learning be accelerated if you did pair program, like
I think
partnered with somebody? How does that look?
Yeah. There's a gentleman, Dr. Anders Ericsson, who studied the skill of acquired learning. And he was actually on a Freakonomics episode. It's very memorable because I think there was another professor in Sweden. Her goal was to become like a professional singer, and she kind of gave a little audition demo, and it's like pretty awful, right? But using in fact, I had using the principles in the book, she actually had I think a top 10 hit in Sweden. It's just amazing. And so basically, he says to get good at anything, it requires I think 4 things, right? You need to have a coach, meaning someone who is more advanced than you. You have to have challenge, right? To be able to do things slightly outside of your ability. You have to have feedback, right? So that someone's giving you good feedback on like what to do differently, doing this great, this not so great. And I think there's a 4th one, but I think that was what that Steve Yegi moment was for me back August 2024. I mean, just to have him say, "Boy, Gene, you're doing a lot of typing. Like, you got to lean on the AI more, make it do the work," right? And then and so it's actually through so many of these pairing episodes that kind of forged the book. Um, and I think there's a and to kind of quote Steven Spear, right now the frontier is so vast, right? And the technology is so idiosyncratic and janky, right? It's just on the one hand, it is so good at conjuring up, if like you want to conjure up Deming based on all of his published works, right? It could quote Deming probably better than most many researchers. On the hand, it can't even count the number of letters correctly, the number of R's in strawberry, right? I mean, it's so curious, how it is, can be so good at one thing and so bad at other things. It really just says that you want to be plugged into a community that is actively sharing notes, because no one person can explore this entire frontier. I'll give you one example. As part of this monthly AI summit I run, which is all around the most switched on kind of adopters of AI for coding, for both leaders and individual contributors. One of them, John Rouser from Cisco, he watched me use Cloud Code, the coding agent, for survey design. He goes, "Gosh, I'm actually doing my performance review right now, my self-assessment. I should be using AI to help do that." So he populated a folder of, one was all of the Cisco values, the job descriptions of every level of leadership, his own status reports and so forth, and he used it to generate his own, annual performance self-assessment, which I remember doing. It was this horrible, awful process, and he showed it to his team. It's like, I want you to do the same thing, right? There are important things to do, and there are important insights that should come out of this performance review process, right? And it's not copying and pasting and summarizing status meetings, right?
Yeah.
So this is all about hanging out with the right people, so you're learning the right things.
Yeah, very cool. There's a question in the chat, and if others have questions, now would be a good time to kind of pop those in, and we'll try and cover as many of them as we can. But this this question here from I don't know how to say that first name, Seon J.
Sung Jae Hong, yeah.
Has related to psychological safety, and how do we maintain that safety when productivity gains creates this like paradox of innovating oneself out of a job?
Oh wow, what a great question. In fact, I'm actually hoping to interview Dr. Liker. We were supposed to connect in December, and I want to pull up my notes. Yeah, so maybe one thing as you interact with technologists, friends, and your new friends, is maybe being aware that, holy cow, we are potentially actively automating ourselves out of a job, but I think the world will be a better place for it. And I think any good person involved in process and kind of, value stream goals, I mean, I think that's always been the job. And not necessarily automating yourself out of a job, but making sure that, human supervision and human labor isn't necessarily always needed to achieve the goal. But I am not so naive to think that, massive dislocation could be a result. And I think there were, just like what happened in the 1980s with mass offshoring, there are going to be people and mechanization and automation. There are going to be leaders who sort of encourage people to create improvements that create significant productivity gains, and then the reward for it is to lay off a significant portion of the workforce who were responsible for creating that gain. And when there could have been much more better things that more enlightened leadership could do. So I think this might sound like a platitude, but it should be familiar, and I think hopefully it will be received as not a platitude. The goal here is right now is for everyone to be using AI, right? To learn what is possible, so that we can work on higher value work. And at the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit, which where I met Tyson, there were, one of the conclusions is that we don't need team for in development. We don't need probably teams of 8 anymore to do consequential, significant work. You don't need 6 developers, a UX design person, and a product owner. You probably need just 2, the person with the problem and the person who can fix it. And the implications of that is that that will reshape the organization, right? Is that you don't have to go through a centralized, queue of work and get prioritized and, get, see if you're whether above the line and below the line and do all the politicking to get above the line. And you have to expedite and, give a duffel bag full of cash, to your buddy in technology to get something done. I think this will decentralize the technology function. And I genuinely believe that, there's something called, many of you I know are familiar with this, Javon's paradox. If you lower the cost of production, say software production by 10x, you don't end up with 1/10 of developers. You probably end up with 10 times more software, which means you need more than 10x developers. So I'm not sure exactly what that curve looks like, but I think the result is, from many of the experience reports, is that when you can solve problems that much faster with smaller teams, you end up with higher aspirations, more goals to chase, and hopefully in ways that move the needle for your organization. So psychological safety is a part of it, but I think another part of it is really understanding, how much more can you get done that you otherwise could not have done before. I'm sorry, I'll just add one more thing. In the book, in the Vibe Coding book, we have something called FAFO: faster, ambitious, alone, or autonomous, fun, and optionality. And one of them is ambition. Things that were like for me in that pair program with Steve Yegi. Could I have written a video excerpt generator maybe in a week if I'm lucky, right? If I'm everything went right, but why didn't I ever work on that before? And I think there was an economic decision I was making, probably subconsciously, is that there's probably something of higher value work to work on, besides that, and that maybe the success rate was sufficiently low that it's better just not to work on that. Imagine now all the work that now becomes possible. So ambitious, impossible becomes possible. Is another end of the spectrum, which is that the small becomes free. So at Anthropic, the AI lab, one of the founders of Cloud Code, she said, there's a phenomenon what they're measuring, which is if a customer issue comes in, instead of putting it in the backlog, creating a ticket, writing it, then putting it into the queue and arguing whether we do it this week or next year, just fix it and it'll be done in 30 minutes or less, right? So it's like the transaction cost has now dropped so much that it's easier just to do it, because recording it and document, and I'm not saying don't record it, but to document the problem to work out later is actually much more expensive than just doing it now. Sorry for the long answer.
No, it was good. Jevon's paradox is one that I've certainly thought applies to technology and developers. There's some good comments about, Steve said, I think lean is partly about putting ourselves out of jobs. We should eliminate and automate putting ourselves out of jobs that demand more creativity and innovation out of low value into high value. And 100%. I think, right, it's, I think all of us would prefer to do the monotonous less and the tedious less and be engaged in that ambitious work where we can create and be more creative.
And in fact, I can just extend that a little bit. So one of the experience reports that was shared at the conference, a team said, we are so dazzled by what is possible. We are going to voluntarily sign up to triple the revenue of our business unit. And it was voluntarily signed up for. So it wasn't jammed down by the board of directors, right? The team said so much more is possible. That our ambitions can be so much larger. That would change, would have a material impact on the company.
So this was when I was at the conference, this air of this sense of, we know that AI and kind of vibe coding, natural language coding is going to completely disrupt things, right? So it was fascinating to me to sit in there as a non-developer and look around and think, other people in knowledge work are concerned, but to think these folks know more than others the potential that this holds in disrupting the who moved my cheese and the value that I contributed. But the way the group kind of embraced and even poked fun at kind of the structures that would are soon to be structures of the past that enabled effectiveness was such a fascinating thing to observe as the anthropologist there being and then it made me think well, this is the right community. I don't know if it was because it was that subset of the community, the ones who had their orientation as like less as like I write code and more as I'm a problem solver, and more as this searching of understanding how to build systems that solve problems and enable the right things to happen. But I thought it was a fascinating moment to observe.
And I love that you said, in fact, if I can just maybe close with this one thought that a friend Ian, he's at a private equity firm that collectively along their portfolio companies employs over 150,000 people, and he said everyone, especially in software, is going to be the most significant leadership challenge of the last century, because all of the rules that we were able to inherit and maybe even take credit for, they're changing, right? Just the notion of waiting, for approval and so forth was always just part of the name of the game, and that was just one of the many causes of delay. What happens when the cost of production goes to zero, and the only thing left are those rules? And so those leaders who can truly adapt the systems to change the rules, to figure out what the new rules of the game are that worked for us pretty well over the last century, I think it will be an exciting 3 years. It's the opposite of boring. Boring. The opposite of boring encompasses many dimensions, but it won't be boring. But it should be exciting as well.
Closing advice for kind of the lean folks that have found themselves in this vortex, a webinar of AI change.
Yeah, I think the advice is, just imagine that AI is going to be a critical skill, for everyone in say 5 to 10 years, say 3 to 5 years. And how good you are at it might be just how many hours have you logged. So start logging those hours. 2 is your technology kindred spirits are out there, and they're going to be affected even more than you. But the opportunities to solve even bigger problems and make more of an impact to your organizations has never been higher. And so if you're imagine that to solve a technology problem doesn't involve years or teams of people involved, it could involve one person in an afternoon, maybe even 90 minutes. That's what's impossible, but you have to know who that person is. Go find that person and go solve problems together. There's never been a more exciting time to be in the game, and there's never been a better time to be alive.
It's awesome. I would push it one step further and say, find that technology person and bring them to our summit, because we have the intersection of these technology leaders and business leaders that that are on the leading edge of building capability quickly. So find them, bring them to the summit. We've tried to build both together, and I think that shared experience will be worthwhile.
And Art Smalley will be at the summit. Yes. And I understand that he is deeply immersed in AI, and I cannot wait to hear what he's been working on. So many great adventures ahead.
Yes. Yeah, come. Art will be there. We'll have a late night geek fest where people can really dig into the details. So if your eyes glaze over in these conversations, the late night might not be for you. But if you're deeply interested in the depths, come and join the late night. So awesome.
Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you all there.
Thanks so much, Gene. It's always great to connect. Oh, and this is the next webinar. This will be a fun one. If you're still hanging on, this is GE Appliances talking about lean shoring and bringing business back essentially from China, and what that capability's done in terms of product and market fit. And Jim will be on that one with Kevin. That's bound to be an exciting one, because it's kind of this example of capability building locally, enabling kind of local jobs and local markets that deliver more value to more clients. So tune into that one. Awesome.